Good afternoon and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live from Bristol every Friday at 1 p.m. and are beaming out onto smartphones, laptops, tablets and living room TVs. We're broadcasting live now on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter, so you've got your pick of channels to watch on. When we can, we host our lunchtime talks as hybrid events with the option to watch online or join us in person in the studio. For now, talks are online only, but we really look forward to welcoming you to our building again soon. I'm Danielle Rose, and my role is network producer. I'm a white woman with long blonde hair, and I'm wearing a black top, and I'm sat in the Pervasive Media Studio makerspace with various equipment behind me. These lunchtime talks are our chance to throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio and for you to hear more from the people who are part of our community or who are working on things that excite us. The talks cover everything from innovative research in the fields of creativity and technology to projects in progress which are in need of feedback, questions and curious minds. An especially big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio, for whom this may be the first time you're engaging with us. Here's a little bit more about what we do. The Pervasive Media Studio is a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, exploring everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. We are a partnership between Watershed, the University of the West of England, and the University of Bristol. The studio is a home for embryonic ideas, research and development of new ideas, and the building of new companies. And we're a meeting place of both creative and commercial industries. We offer studio space, offering desk space, meeting rooms, events, and opportunities to all our residents. We are a space for people and companies to take risks in their practice and to make time for collaboration. Our last talk of every month is BSL Interpreted. A captioned and recorded version of this talk will also be available online a short while after the talk is finished. The content of today's talk includes themes related to mental health. There will be a Q&A at the end of the talk, and if you're watching online, please pop your questions in the YouTube chat. We'll answer as many as we can within the time available. You can get news on all our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, following us on PM Studio UK on Twitter, or Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. You can also subscribe to this new YouTube channel and subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Now I'd like to introduce today's talk and speaker. Today we are delighted to be joined by Sabba Khan, who will give us a reflective presentation on her debut graphic novel, The Roles We Play. Since it was published in July last year, it's had an incredible response from readers and critics alike, including being selected as one of The Guardian's top 11 graphic novels of 2021. As well as being a graphic novelist, Sabba is an architectural designer and artist. Sabba, thank you so much for joining us today, and over to you.
Hi, Danielle. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute honor. I am, firstly, a brown female. I identify as she, her. I'm standing up. I've got dark brown hair that goes up to my shoulders, and I'm wearing a light gray jumper. Yep, I'm stood up in my studio in the attic, and what you see behind me is a wooden wall with some printouts of some of my artwork and some other artists' artwork that I like. Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking you through, will that happen? Yes, we've got my clicker on. We're going to be talking through my practice. I studied architecture, so I'm an architectural designer by trade. But over the last couple of years, I've been doing comics, and just last year, I released my graphic novel, which is the center image, The Roles We Play. In addition to that, I also do other art projects as well. So today I'll be talking you through primarily the book, I think, because that's still such a massive body of work that still feels fresh, even though it's been 6 months. And then I'll be talking you through some of the other aspects of my practice as well. And hopefully towards the end, can get a bit of time to just talk about next steps possibly for me, since it's the new year. Okay, so the book itself, just a few little details. It's a graphic novel, which means it's drawn and illustrated by me. There's lots of different ways that you can approach graphic novels. There's some where you could be a writer and you pair up with an illustrator, or some of the where graphic novels came from, which was more of the comics genre. You'll have a whole team of people where you even have colorists and letterists and lots of different types of people. But then there's this genre, which I sit in, where the author does everything. I draw, write, color, compose, put the whole thing together. So it's very much a singular vision coming through me. And Myriad Editions, the publishers, they tend to gravitate towards these kinds of graphic novels as well. And they're a real growing medium within the genre as well. And it's really exciting. So this particular book, it's 288 pages of fully drawn, colored stuff by me. It's based on my personal lived experience, and it's framed by my family's history. So both of those things sort of start to come into play. So that's the sort of physical aspect of the book. And yes, as Danielle mentioned in my bio, just last month, actually December, The Guardian picked it up as one of its best graphic novels of 2021. And that really blew me away, because I just, I thought they were ignoring me. I was like, oh, I'm probably not good enough, and, not good enough for The Guardian. But then this happened, and I'm still pinching myself. And that's why I thought I'd just make a bit of space for it in the presentation, because I think because so many things are digital now and we're receiving things digitally and not physically, it's just nice to be able to talk about it to people. Even though I can't see your faces and I can only see Danielle's, it's okay. I know that it's projecting. So I'll just read out a bit of what they've read, because it just gives me tingles and goosebumps. The Roles We Play explores history, culture, family ties, and psychotherapy. Imaginative framing, expressive sketches, and thoughtful prose combine in a fascinating debut full of acute observations. So that's a really nice way of saying it. It's very succinct. I would never be able to get it succinct. So yeah, really excited about that. And in addition to that, it's actually recently I had an interview with It's Nice That as well, which was really lovely. When it got published in July, that month was also the second year that we were having South Asian Heritage Month. So it's still a new thing. I think people are still hearing about it, and all of us that are South Asian artists and writers and poets, we get really excited, because we're like, finally we have a thing that we can start to push towards. So yeah, July is the month of South Asian Heritage Month, and Cosmopolitan picked it up as one of the 20 best books to read as well for then, which was really nice. Eastern Eye as well, one of the leading South Asian tabloid newspapers, was also did an interview for my book, which was really lovely. So just going back to the book itself, here's a little video. I think Jack is going to, shall I press the next button and then it goes into, oh no, okay, cool. Thanks, Jack. Here's a little video of just a flick through. I thought it'd be nice to just give you a snapshot of what it looks like. So it's composed of 30 short stories. It's non-linear, it's non-chronological, and each of the short stories, the short stories themselves, they're based on memories and experiences, and they're on these white pages. But then you have these slightly light pink pages that serve as the in-between of the memories and the stories, and they act like a narrator page. So that's where I start to go into more of a reflective womb-like space. That's how I imagined it, and that's the thread that takes you along the journey, and it really does jump around quite a lot. I think people often what I've heard is that they'll just rip through a graphic novel because it's really quick to digest and absorb. But a lot of people were coming back to me saying they had to really take their time with it because there's some heavy topics that are explored, and they're done in a very quite complex way as well. And I think for me, the structure of the book was really to represent, to help me make my job easier, which I guess for me, the book doesn't really, focus on any one particular event. For me, the whole purpose of the book was to capture my experience as a diaspora and as a migrant, and just all of the levels of complexity and just contradiction that I found myself in as well. And I think every time I tried to untangle it, it would just retangle again. And I think every time you try to pull it apart, the way you decompose it's completely different based on where you are at that moment in time, what you're feeling, whether you're, even like menstrual cycles, whether you're at the peak of your menstrual cycle or low, like the way you're seeing yourself. So there's so many influences that go into it. So for me, it was just like, let's just make it easy and let's do it as a non-linear structure, and hopefully it will start to pull together. And, thankfully it did. So that's just a bit of a snapshot of the book itself. And yeah, so I thought I would, as a way to start to unpack it a little bit, I thought I'd go into some of the themes for you. I've chosen this image here to represent that, because I think so many of my themes are deliberately overlapping, deliberately contradictory, just to help to bring that nuance in. So I often use these like overlapping faces, different moments in time, different ways that I've projected myself outwardly, overlapping in one moment, because actually you are always those different people at any one given time. And it's you can't, you're not just one facet, you are a multifaceted being. And I think it's just, I guess, making space for that and celebrating that. So yeah, the themes. Oops, I just used my keyboard. No, I've got to do it on my phone. Okay, so the first massive theme for me, oh my gosh, this is like the underbelly of the graphic novel, is diaspora, displacement and migration. So a lot of it is my own lived experience, but I'm just going to scroll up on my notes, but a huge, for me, I see my experiences contextualized through my family's migration history, and the reasons why they found themselves in the UK in the way that they did. Displacement is not a word that they would often use to describe themselves, but as I looked into the history and made the connections to partition and empire, and then my family's very specific Mangla Dam history, it all started to make sense and connect in a way that, for me, it felt like an offering to my family and to my peers within my family, or my cousins and my brothers and sisters, just as a way for us to just zoom out and look at the wider picture. So here's an image for those of you who are struggling. Like, I really struggle with geography, and if I didn't come from this area, I'd really struggle to imagine it. Anyway, Pakistan, India, blue and yellow, and then that top knot at the top is Kashmir. It's divided by Pakistan, India, and parts of China as well. So lots of people don't know that. My family actually live within the darker blue side, so they're within the Pakistan administered Kashmir. That's the relatively safe zone. So when you hear about like the information blockades or the militarization, that tends to be around the India side, where a lot of the activity and the unrest is. Where my parents are from is relatively stable right now, and they go and visit it quite regularly. So that is really just an introduction to that theme. Oops, I've done it again. I keep going to my keyboard. So there's a few maps that you'll find in the book as well. So this is a map of another version of that previous map as well. This one is focusing more on the partition lines. So you've got Pakistan, you've got India, and I'm drawing the rivers between the two. And what you can see really is that the dotted line between India and Pakistan is the partition line, but you see the rivers flowing in between them. There's 5 rivers of the Indus tributary that runs from the Himalayas to the Indian Ocean, and it just crisscrosses between the 2 countries. So when partition happened in 1947, it was a real it took them about 15 years to realize that there was a huge geopolitical issue at their hands, that one country could essentially starve the other country of its water supply. And so in I think in 1960, they then the UN got involved, and a water treaty was signed. And part of that water treaty, there was the inclusion to build dams and reservoirs to help contain that water and help regulate the water supply, so that you can feed the populations, and it goes back to agriculture and livelihoods really. So it was a huge sort of, and it's really interesting because it's like, that's the mess up of partition, right? And that's the connection that I think doesn't get made and doesn't get spoken about. And it's just like, okay, these are the knock-on effects of partition. Often we talk about the history of it, the migration of it, and the fact that there was so much bloodshed and the 2 countries split in terms of religion and so many things within itself. But then it's like, what's the knock-on effect? What's the impact that's had on the landscape? And so that's where I've started to move into this space. So I liken the 5 rivers of the Indus like the 5 fingers of a vice-like grip. And then I look at I look at my hands, I look at the body. So it's making connections between the landscape and myself, and ourselves, really just moving between those scales from like vast map-like landscape to us, and to the lines that are on our hands, scarred ley lines and sacred tributaries, like the folds and the palm of my hand tell our histories and our fortunes. So it's sort of, I've done it, I'm going to keep doing it throughout the whole presentation. So the dam was a big feature in my family's migration history, and I make space for it. So this is a double-page spread looking at the point where the dam had been constructed and it filled the villages. There were 288 villages that were submerged. I think 111,000 people were displaced, and they displaced in lots of different areas locally. They moved to different cities, but also so many migrated to the UK. And that connects back to a key statistic where 2/3 of Pakistanis within England are associated back to Mirpuri, back to the dam. And it was just a huge influx of migration that was a response to this. Something that I knew about in the background, my family would loosely talk about it, but it was never structured in this way. And so for me, this book was a space to really make sense of that for myself. Okay. Yeah, and so I sort of pare it back down for myself. I studied architecture. It's not very academic. It's quite vocational, at least the way I taught it. I was taught it. So there were big themes, political themes, and just historic themes that I was looking at, and for me it was just an opportunity to make sense of it and detangle it. So at each point I'm like, what does this actually mean? And like simplifying it. And I think the fact that I was using a visual language as well, it would force me to capture it. So here, what is it, this is part of a larger piece, and I've just taken this bit because it looks nice as well, it's cute. So I'm drawing my parents in a really cute kind of way as well. What is a diaspora? I'm representing their broken homes with the pile of bricks, and they're collecting the bits that they're going to take with them. The movement, migration, or scattering of a people, they're taking their belongings, and this isn't just physical, this is emotional as well, their emotional baggage, away from an established ancestral homeland, and they're being whisked away. and by then it was the Commonwealth. Great Britain had pulled out of the Second World War, and there were labour shortages, and that was another connecting back to Windrush as well. There was a huge influx of people coming, migrants from the Commonwealth, providing that cheap labour in the factories and the mills of the UK. And there's, I go into that as well in terms of all the different things that my dad did when he first migrated over. What time is it? Oh, okay, I'm talking loads. Okay. This is good though, it's good. I'm like nice and relaxed, which is nice. Okay, so I need to be quick. Okay, so Mangla Dam. So for me, it's again going back to how can I make sense of this as a second generation migrant living in East London? How can I connect back to who I am as a person? And so I look at the square area, the square footage of Mangla Dam, and I'm like counting the boroughs of London to sort of just compare, so I can get like an idea of what that means. So that's what that does as well. So for me, it's like infographics that then start to tell a story. And that's combined with my mum's oral storytelling. So the chapter around the migration, my mum was just a tiny little baby when actually she wasn't a tiny, I think she was like 7 or 8 years old. That's not a baby. She was like old enough to remember it, but young enough to like it just be like a really distant memory for her, and just like in her gut and in her bones. So when she talks about it, it's very emotional, and it's very like, and so for me, I think my job was to take those emotions and like translate that visually. So here, the dam is represented as this like foreign, alien, hard, engineered thing that cuts across the landscape, and it, separates the village off. So much of it was just about like telling the story visually as well. Quite happy with that page. And then like the symbolism of it as well. There was once when she came over and she saw me drawing, and she was like, I still dream of that land. Like I'm still walking through those streets like a ghost. And it was just so powerful that I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna write that down. And then it made it in, and just she's a poet really, and it was just really lovely having her coming in and dipping in. So here I've got Queen's Market, which is our local market that caters for working class East Londoners, and I've got the old Mirpuri city, and I've got the Himalayas in the background, and the two come together because really that's her existence. So kind of just like doing justice to those feelings that in the there's just this sort of intensity of it. The second theme, massive one, is religion, identity, and self. So for me, this also fed into the like non-linear structure, because I've had a journey with religion, and I think it could very easily be taken as a linear journey. Traditional conservative girl from a traditional conservative family, visibly Muslim, goes out into the world and gets liberated and takes her hijab off, and hey presto. And I think that's where, like, for me, that was just so crass and crude and awful and cringy, and I was just like, it can't be that. But then part of it was that was part of my journey. So it's kind of making space for the reality of it, but also like zooming out and actually being like, no, it's actually quite circular, and there's you're constantly coming back to look at those past things, and actually, do you ever let go? Like within one generation, what scope is there to shift and change? And not even scope, but like what do you hold on to as well, like subconsciously hold on to, that you don't realize that you're doing. So I'm going to try not to blab too much. So I make moments for when I was younger, and the religion was intimately connected to me and my mum, and the hijab was a really beautiful thing that I loved, and I like played around with and I experimented with. So there's moments where I like make time for that, and that's really important because that was my starting point. yeah, I kind of wondered whether I should change the slide. Actually, there's lots of stuff that happened that fed into the breakdown of my relationship with the religion, but I think this starts to represent that, I think, for me. And I start to nod to you know, symbolic devices to represent that. So that's sort of taken from René Magritte's painting, where, you know, you can't quite see yourself. And in the book that I've got on the shelf is John Berger's Ways of Seeing, this idea that you're being seen by other people and the pressure of that. And then the faces on the right are kind of nodding to the hear no evil, see no evil, and the idea that you're you become like a representative, and you're just playing a role of the pious, righteous Muslim girl, but actually, like, you know, are you able to cultivate a deeper spirituality for yourself, even though you've got this very heightened perform, you know, where society is really looking at you with this performative element, and it's not performative, it's just the way I perceived it at that time. Like, you know, it doesn't have to be. It was very much my experience at that time. I was making time for it, and this was a really difficult time as well, where difficult in that I think I felt quite isolated. So I started to move towards, I discovered the Council of Ex-Muslims and just fell into all of their interviews and forums and spaces that they'd created. And that was quite a beautiful time for me, even though it was really charged and really quite lonely as well. It suddenly showed me that there were other people that were having similar thoughts and having similar crises. And then in and amongst that, you've got Islamophobia, you've got the war on terror, you've got these horrible, horrible, heavy messages that are being played to you. And I think for me, when I was doing it, it was just like, this was the journey, and I need to honor that journey, and I need to give compassion to that journey in a way that at the time I may not have felt it. Like I was doing that for my past self, which was quite important. So I think this is where, like, again, going back to the nuance and the complexity, it's like, this is what makes us who we are, right? So let's honor that. So that was actually really nice. This is one of my favorite pages, one of my favorite images in the book, actually. It's a 2-page chapter, one of the shortest chapters, and you know, it's making nods to the idea of who sees who, and I'm also going back to the circular nature of it. So I talk about how I still dream with my headscarf on, even though I've taken it off. It's still around me and it's still comfort for me. But then when I look at other hijabis, I've lost that connection with them because they don't see me like that. And it's just, you know, just sort of like notions on belonging and unbelonging and losing things that you thought were not there to lose until you'd lost them. So quite big stuff that I then visualize. And then outside of all of that, a lot of the faith stuff is through my perspective and my lens. And then I ask bigger questions of, hey, if Islam was trendy, like yoga is trendy, what would that be like? And, you know, we've got the 5 prayers of the 5 daily prayers in Islam, very meditative, very yogic. So I'm like, you know, there's all these positions that we do in Islam that are actually really similar to yoga poses, but we don't ever, you know, talk about it like that. And so it's like, let's imagine a space where it's actually really cool and amazing. And so I create this pattern out of the 5 poses, and I'm just like playing around with shapes and this is where for me it starts to get a little bit sort of sacred geometry, Monument Valley meets Escher, and I sort of like really enjoy playing around with that sort of like visual language as well. So I find this pattern, it's on the internet, I forgot what it's called, but there's loads of like mad videos on YouTube where there's this like really magical pattern that tessellates, it's continuously tessellating and infinitely growing, and that's what I started to draw here, and I connect it back to faith and spirituality, and it's just like, yeah, it could be magical if we want it to be. And ultimately it's, there's loads of other things that I cover in the book as well, but fundamentally one of the fundamental drives for me for the book was also for it to be about love, and for it to be about healing, and for it to be about humanity. So I show my dad a lot of love, even though most of the times I feel like he doesn't deserve it. Is it working? Yes, okay, cool. And then also the complex space between me and my white middle class male partner, where we sit at the intersection of lots of different things and power dynamics. And I often draw that, again, looking at optical illusions and Escher-esque spaces where it's like, this shouldn't be working, but it's kind of working, and how is it working? And so it makes space for that. And also just, the power dynamic of being white and male in architecture, and me being like female and brown in architecture. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we're contending with all the time. A lot of people have said the book is actually about my mum. So she's a huge figure in the book. This is one of the double page spreads in the book where we start to actually make space for each other. It's gotten really pixelated. Is that just me? Okay, I'll move on. And then myself as well, love and healing and compassion and grace for myself. So this is one of this is a poem from Allama Iqbal. He's a Pakistani poet, and the poem was translated by Sabba Khan. She's a musician based in East London, and really just looking at that as a way to like make it circular, because I start off with looking at myself in the mirror. I won't read the poem to you, I'll let you read that when you get the book. Okay, and that's the end of me sharing the book. This is a fan art, a visual response by Baljinder Kaur, my first fan art. So if you feel inclined to visually respond to my book, please do. This gave me so much joy. And I've actually got it printed out like there behind me. It's amazing. I love her practice, and just seeing this was just really lovely. Actually, I feel like she captured a lot of, I guess, where I was trying to move with the book. So that's the end of the book share, and I think I'm on time, which is great. So just a little bit behind, but that's okay. I'm going to quickly skim through my other projects as well, so you get an idea of some of the other stuff that I've been doing. And I'm kind of like mixing architectural and visual, so hopefully it's exciting. So this is another massive body of work. Well, I mean, it wasn't like physically massive, but very heavy. So Drawing Power actually won an Eisner Award last year. It's an anthology, a visual response to the Me Too movement. So looking at sexual abuse and violence, gender-based violence, and it's a massive tome. My piece was an eight-page contribution. I also did the front cover as well, and it was a really big theme. But I think this piece represents how I used visual metaphor and symbolism to get across the emotions of an event. So this whole piece looked at a really dark experience of a member of my family, but it never ever showed it, and it never directly spoke about it. It was always suggested, and it was always just sort of symbolized, I guess, and I used bricks as a way to do that. So for me, the breaking down of bricks, the creation of structures, the enclosure, the confinement, the decay as well. So these are just some of the snapshots that did that, and just represented the states of emotion. And I think it did it really well. So quite happy about that one. But you can kind of see, I think at this time we were probably doing like brickwork in the self build, which is probably how it came across. You'll see that when I show that later. Okay, cool. So one of the other projects that for me is really cool, because it's architect, like I really struggle with manifesting emotions and feelings in architecture. And I think that's one of my biggest, that was why I kind of had to let go of it and move towards something that was a lot more direct, and the visual space for me is immediate. But this project did that for me, and I hold on to it because I'm like, if this was, we did this, it was possible, we can do it again in other ways, and we can do it. So here it's a structure that we made that was it was a symbolic room of one's own. So we took Virginia Woolf's essay and we were like, let's make a room of one's own, but it starts off as light and ephemeral and ghostly. The idea is that it's not quite there, but it's the community and the people that come together that mark on it. So we invited people to write on it, to draw on it, to write poetry on it, and do whatever they wanted to do with it. And the idea was that collectively we would make it emerge through the pens and the ink and the mark making, I guess. So that was quite a cool one. And we made that all ourselves. Another one that for me is, again, just I really have a lot of love in this, just because I've not really I really enjoyed drawing elderly South Asian people, and I realized that we don't get to draw that enough. So these were postcards that were given to vulnerable elderly South Asian people in Birmingham during the lockdown, and they were to serve as like a well-being, a gentle reminder in their homes. They'd scatter them across their homes, just to like physically and mentally take care of themselves. So it had this dual function, and it was meant to be quite soft and gentle and just beautiful to look at as well, and just a reminder to take care of ourselves during that really difficult time when we were all in lockdown. So hydrate your soul, open your space, rest your sweet mind. So just really simple messages, but have this kind of dual function. This is the self-build. So this is the brick wall that I was talking about. So my partner and I have, whilst I was making the book, we were also demolishing the house that we bought off my dad and reconstructing it ourselves as a way to build up our own architectural practice. So we have started to do architectural projects as well together, and that's a collective thing. And yes, so much of it is done by us, and mainly Mark, really. He's the labourer on site. You could probably hear him in the background, which is really annoying because I don't think he realizes that you can hear that tapping sound. Anyway, this is another project that looks at workplace environments and racial experiences, and this was really propelling like lived experience for people, and how actually employers need to take responsibility for the work culture, but also like not in a heavy way, like more of a curious way. Like, how can we, if these things are happening that are so personal and so charged, and colleagues or people that you're working with, like end users, how there's so many layers to it, how can we start to have those conversations where we can support each other and hold each other, and not be part of the problem. So this one's actually not live, so I can't discuss any of the details about this, but I got permission to show the images. So I'm a bit like, be vague. This is more of my art practice, and for me, because I did architecture and now I'm doing visuals, they feel so far apart, and everything that I'm doing is always trying to bring them together so I can just feel like a whole person and not feel like I've got so many different fragments of my personality. So here I took this was in response to a group exhibition called Recipes of Resistance. My response to it was taking a rolling pin that's traditionally used in making roti. I have gone over now, but that's okay, I'll just be really quick. And I carved in my dad, me and my mum, and it was really just reinforcing the repetitive nature of it, but turning it into a print object. So instead of it making roti, it can talk. Like, it was like, if my rolling pin could talk, what would it say? And fundamentally, the idea was to, oh, come on, you can go, yeah, oops. Well, actually, it's okay, we can go to this next one. I then took the rolling pin and I made these like 3 triptych prints that you see at the top right. And the idea was that it doesn't necessarily challenge the role of making roti. It was more just about, can we change the perceptions of it? And for me, making roti when I was growing up was very much part of the girls' space. This is what the girls do, this is how they take care of the family, and it was very subservient, very traditional role. But actually, you know, if you look at it in the lens of caregiver, nourisher, someone who provides the food, you know, asking the question of, if that domestic labor was elevated and prioritized and celebrated, actually someone who considers themselves as subservient is like suddenly like, you know, the matriarch of the family. And it was just sort of charging those charting rather those shifts, and asking for that change. I think within the structure of my family, at least. I know that there's a lot of other South Asians that might not necessarily think that, but that was the case for my family. And so that's the end of the presentation, and I'm just 2 minutes late. These are just a few little words that I feel represent my practice. So embodied art, lived experience, interrogating, moving between scales, galvanizing, making space for the uncomfortable. I think that's really important for me. Simplifying, but I think simplifying is more galvanizing. I feel like they're connected. Like, it's not so much about taking away, but it's about like pressure cooker, like concentrating, and intersections as well. And that's me, and you can find me on Instagram. I'm mostly active there, but I also come to Twitter every once in a while. So that's it.
Thank you so much. We will now take some questions from the audience, which we've received via comments on YouTube. But to start, before the talk, we spoke briefly about representation, and that though one person is not ever representative of a whole group, there seems to still be pressure placed on individuals around representation. Would you like to talk a bit more about how this and how it's played out in relation to your own work?
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. I like talking about this because I think it's we've had such a trajectory of like gatekeeping, I guess, in terms of who gets to publish, who is published, whose voices are heard, that I think, and now suddenly we're seeing a groundswell of lots of different people coming in, and really that's the place that we want to start to head. I think we don't want to look at the fact that, oh, Sabba's done a graphic novel on being Azad Kashmiri, and that's really special, and there's nothing out there that's like that. Like, I would quite like to see more graphic novels by other South Asians and other Azad Kashmiris as well. And the moment you start seeing that, you see that we all come from completely different viewpoints. And I think for me as well, whilst I was doing the book, there was definitely like, I felt like I needed to represent in terms of, you know, there's not a graphic novel that looks at this. There isn't even actually a lot of literature that looks at this, but it was always just framing it from my point of view, and the fact that actually I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic. There's a lot of space for other people to come in here. And also like just my intersection, the fact that I did architecture and I came at it through this weird left field way, like, you know, I just feel like we're starting to move. People are calling for that complexity and that nuance, which is really exciting, because that does away with the pressure of like, you know, this is the, you know, South Asian comics artist, and there's so many of us out there that are doing this sort of stuff now as well. So yeah, I think it's starting to loosen the hold, which is good.
Thank you. You mentioned about your architectural practice. How does this inform how you represent space and design within your graphic novels?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I feel like I've been sitting with this for quite a long time. And I think because I'd trained for like 5 years and I'd been practicing for a good couple of years as well before I let go of it, I hadn't realized what I was doing. And then when I did it in the book, I just did it because it came naturally. But a few people have said this to me, and I think now that I've had a bit of space, it's been 6 months, and I look back at it, there's actually a lot of reference to how the body relates to the physical environment, whether that's in a home, whether that's furniture, like it moves between scales as well. And when I was looking at the map with the hands, like it's I'm doing it constantly, and I don't realize I'm doing it, I think, because it's just something that I did whilst I was studying. So I think someone needs to unpack my book and like look at that, because it's definitely happening. I've just not done it in a very conscious way. It's just sort of been like molded in, which I think for me is the best kind as well, because that for me was like, that's how I'm going to symbolize it. That's how I'm going to represent this, is through this relationship between like me as a little child and the stuff that's going on around me. So there's this beautiful image of like me hiding under the table, and I'm like looking out for my mum, and I'm like, is she going to see me, you know? And it's just that one particular chapter really like zooms into it quite specifically as well. So yeah, it's definitely there.
And then thinking about how also the graphic novel may also impact the other way, Melissa Blackburn asked, has the book affected your job in architecture or your architectural practice?
Yeah, so I actually ended up leaving for the book. So it was a massive impact, but I welcomed it because I was really struggling with architecture, to be honest. One of the reasons why I was delving into the comic space was because I didn't feel like I had that space in the architectural industry to be able to bring my whole self to it. And that's really sad for me. And I think that's a journey that I'm going on now, because you know, I'm married to a person who wants to set up an architectural practice, and he's like, you've got the skills to also do this with me. So I'm starting to move towards this space that we've created between us, and I feel like that will be healing. I hope, like, it's starting to happen. We're still finishing off the self build, which is going to be like our big, you know, grand project that we show to everyone and we use to get bigger projects off of. But yeah, I think it's been a huge impact, and I think I don't know. Well, I hope that I'm able to in the future bring this like inquiry and this sensitivity and like reflection that I've cultivated in my art practice. I hope I can then bring that to the architecture space, because that was where I didn't have that before. So it'd be nice to be able to link the two together in that way.
Thank you. We've got lots of questions coming through. So I've got one from Vic, who said, it was so interesting what you said about distant memory living in the gut and the bones of your mum. Could you talk a bit more about how that embodiment of memory manifests in your research and conversations?
Oh gosh, wow, that's quite a big one. Yeah, so I talk a lot about, this might be a very literal response to this, so apologies, Nick, but there's a page in the book where I'm at an osteopath's clinic, and we're talking about the pain in my shoulders and how it's created this tension, and we're talking about how it's not physical and how it's emotional. And I have this whole dialogue with my mum about like that's going on, and I capture that in the graphic novel, but in real life there's such a big dialogue that I have with my mum about our like core, our breathing, the way we hold ourselves, the way, and I look at the way she holds herself, and she'll be like tense, and she'll kind of like do this, and I'm like, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm mirroring her, and I'm holding on to anxiety in the same way that she does. And it's quite complex because, you know, like when they came to the UK, her way of getting income was working on a sewing machine, and that's quite a common thing for a lot of South Asian women from the 60s and 70s. And that dying textile trade that was happening in the UK, or at least dying because it has now become invisible. I don't know. Anyway, you know, she was on the sewing machine for 20 odd years and ended up getting like a spinal thing on her back. And that's she often talks about how the labor of that has really like changed the way she carries herself. And one of the reasons why I ended up at Central St. Martin's was because I wanted to do fashion, because she was a seamstress and I really wanted to follow her steps. And again, this is something that I capture in the book about how she then just completely was like, no, you're not going to do that, because do you remember this lump on my back? It's disfigured my spine, and I don't want the same for you. So I don't know if I think it lives in, it's so visceral, it's so it's everywhere, it's in all these moments. And I think the book was that space where I was like, okay, what are the key moments that I want to bring in to represent that? So hopefully that answers it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So another question we've got. So what would be your dream future project?
Oh gosh, dream future project. I think, okay, yeah, I know what it is. Okay, so in the future, Sabba has brought together her storytelling, her emotive, narrative, visual stuff, and combined it with the architectural, and it becomes a immersive, experiential, narrative-led theatre thing that you're enveloped in. So it's like you as the audience are participating with it, and there's several different rooms and there's lots of different things going on, and the storytelling has become physical, and it's projections and animations and moving props, and there's lots of crazy lighting, and there's lots of actors that are helping me do this, and costumes. I'm not quite sure what the story is going to be, but like for me, that space where it's physical but it's also like heavily narrative based as well, but not not technical. Like I think there's a lot of like VR stuff and things that are very digital now. Like I don't think it's going to be that. I think it has to be quite physical. So yeah, that's the intersection. And I've got like a team of people that are helping me do that, because I don't know right
now. That sounds amazing. I very much hope that can happen, and I can see in the chat people are saying yes, come and make it here at Pervasive Media Studio. But definitely it's something we should keep in touch about, and I wonder if there's any residents watching today who may be interested in talking to you more, or potential future collaborators. So I'm really aware of time, and that we've also got so many questions, but also aware that we do need to start wrapping up. So I think you did share your contact details on the last slide. So are you happy as people to make contact if they've got other questions or want to carry on the conversation?
Yeah.
Okay, and I think we talked about before, it would be nice to end on maybe just talking about some of the exciting things that you've got coming up next. You touched a bit at the end. Is there anything else you want to talk about that you've got coming up?
Yeah, so I definitely want to move. I think the long-term aspiration is to move towards further bring the two intersections together. But I think right now I'm like, the self-build has been huge, and it's been such an emotional drain, but it's also been the place where both of our families have come together as well, in a way that neither of us had anticipated, or even like we didn't even think that would happen, but it has. So I don't know, I kind of feel like I really want to unpack that as well. So I posted, I don't know if I should be saying, I don't know, but I think I still want to tell stories on the page in the way that the book was. I think like that's still something that is calling me, and I think the self-build project could be unpacked and made sense of in the book, in a graphic novel format. So a place where I really start to bring in the emotional lived experience side to it, and blend it in with like some of the more technical aspects and some of the more aspirational notions around like building your own home and changing the home, and you know, but also like the political side of it, the fact that this is such a precious, rare, privileged thing to be in a position where we have the support of our families to be able to do something like this. And I don't know, just sort of like reflecting on that, I think there's lots of things that could go on there, but yeah, I think that's probably that. Yeah, I feel like that's going to be the next thing, but I don't know, you can't hold me up, you can't hold me to that, I think.
Thank you so much. That's all we've got time for today. I also want to say thank you. I also want to say thank you to our excellent technician, Jack, and also to those watching at home. Before you go, next week's talk is on Friday, the 21st of January, and it's with Ankarad Davies, who will be speaking around the Joey Pod, a sensory pod for people with autism spectrum disorder. You can get news on all our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, following us on PM Studio UK on Twitter, or Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. You can also subscribe to this YouTube channel and subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again, same time, same place, every Friday.